Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's a blessing to be here with you this evening as we continue through our Shabbatot of the month of Elul. We continue to study our community read, the Sabbath by Abraham Joshua Heschel. If you don't have your copy yet, we might still have some available over by the table over there. Thank you, Brian. Let's, just so I know, you can be honest, no judgment. Who's been reading along with us? All right. And who is so excited to dip their toes in and get reading? All right. And who's got more important busy things to do? Heschel has a lot to say about that. But I'm really just stalling for a little bit of time so we can get our source sheets around. But we're going to dive into this book. We read the opening last week, and this week we're in section 1. You should be able to see it if you're joining us online as well. In section 1, we have 2 chapters. We have A Palace in Time and Beyond Civilization. This concept of a palace in time is near and dear to Heschel, and this idea of transcending civilization, the toil of civilization will play out as we go through. There'll be 2 times during this little study where I'll have you turn to your neighbor, so get ready to make friends quickly. But we're going to start with creation. If you look at our first source on your page, it might surprise some of you. We actually have 2 creation stories at the beginning of the book of Genesis. And Heschel plays on both of them and talks a little bit differently about each as he's preparing for the Sabbath. So first, I'm going to read this left-hand column and listen to the difference in the language of the command of the humans in this. The first one from Genesis 1:28. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on the earth. Master it. Have dominion over it." In the second, Genesis 2:15, we have the eternal God settled the human in the Garden of Eden to till and to tend it. You can hear the difference in those 2 texts. And Heschel's going to talk about work and labor and the 6 days in a way that taps in to both these different feels of our job here on earth. So the top right-hand square here, how proud we often are of our victories in the war with nature. Proud of the multitude of instruments we have succeeded in inventing, of the abundance of commodities we have been able to produce. Yet our victories have come to resemble defeats. In spite of our triumphs, we have fallen victim to the work of our hands. It is as if the forces we have conquered us. The story is cosmic and powerful. In Genesis 1, humanity is created last in God's image, set to power to master the earth. And Heschel notices a danger here, this idea of what happens when we try to power over, have victories over nature that often become defeats. The more we produce, the more we can come enslaved to our own works. This bottom section here, from the same page from Heschel, labor is not only the destiny of man, it is endowed with divine dignity. The Sabbath as a day of abstaining from work is not a deprecation, but an affirmation of labor, a divine exaltation of its dignity. The duty to work for 6 days is just as much a part of God's covenant with man as the duty to abstain from work on the 7th. Here we're talking about what work and rest can be in relationship, and work is not punishment. He talks about toil in that way. This is sacred. Shabbat doesn't dismiss work, it elevates it by giving it meaning and setting limits for it. So we go from the 2 Genesis creation stories to 2 great thinkers. We're going to throw Aristotle into the mix here. And Aristotle had a lot of great ideas. I'm not here to outright dismiss Aristotle. And you'll see where you find the balance. So Aristotle, as Heschel quotes him, says we need relaxation because we cannot work continuously. Relaxation, then, is not an end. So for Aristotle, rest is to refresh, like recharging a battery so you can get back to work. Heschel disagrees. For him, the Sabbath is not the means to an end, it is the end. The Sabbath is not for the purpose of enhancing the efficiency of work. The Sabbath is not for the sake of the weekdays are for the sake of the Sabbath. So taking these texts into account, turn to the person nearby you, inspire them with your brilliance, and ask yourselves the question, if our work is both powerful and sacred, how do we keep it from mastering us? Or you might want to talk about how you balance the contrasting ideas of Heschel and Aristotle. Take a moment. Talk amongst yourselves. Inspire. I so wish we could spend all night doing this. I really do. But I am going to ask you to finish your last brilliant point. Who here was inspired by something they heard from a neighbor? I hope. Inspiration? Yeah, at least one. Caleb was inspired. Great. I hope you learned something. It is not the end. Conversations can continue, but for this sake, we're going to move a little bit forward to another piece that Heschel talks about in these two chapters as he discusses the prohibitions of Shabbat. If you've studied Shabbat a lot, you know there's a lot of thou shalt nots and restrictions on what you can do on Shabbat. Shout one out. What's something you shouldn't do on Shabbat according to our tradition? Drive. I heard start a fire. You're not supposed to cut things. There's all kinds of creative acts that we're supposed to refrain from. Why? I really like Heschel's answers to why. If you flip your page, you can look at source 3, where he compares how we speak about Shabbat to how we speak about God sometimes. And the holiest experiences we have are best expressed by what we don't do or say. Indeed, says Heschel, the splendor of the day is expressed in terms of abstentions, just as the mystery of God is more adequately conveyed via negationis, the negative way, in the categories of negative theology, which claims that we can never say what God is, we can only say what God is not. Perhaps we talk about the Sabbath in the same way, this taste of the divine. We can use this negative theology around it with these restrictions. He goes on to talk about the ancient rabbis and how they approached Shabbat. This is what the ancient rabbis felt, that Sabbath demands all of man's attention. The service and single-minded devotion of total love. The logic of such a conception compelled them to enlarge constantly the system of laws and rules of observance. So they kept adding. And in their case, they kept adding restrictions. Yet law and love, discipline and delight were not always fused. In their illustrious fear of desecrating the spirit of the day, the ancient rabbis established a level of observance which is within the reach of exalted souls, but not infrequently beyond the grasp of ordinary men. These laws of Shabbat can sometimes feel burdensome if you've ever tried to keep a true Shomer Shabbat. At times, each of us may feel like this exalted soul where we are within the grasps of that holiness of Shabbat. And sometimes we might feel like the ordinary person who can't quite tap into it. You know, we've had those Saturday afternoons where there's a list of things to do, and there's kids yelling and screaming, and there's, stuff, and you can't quite tap in. And maybe we feel ordinary in that way. He's going to continue. I'll go to source 5 and 6 quickly. To observe the seventh day does not mean merely to obey or to conform to the strictness of this divine command. To observe is to celebrate the creation of the world and to create the seventh day all over again, the majesty of holiness in time. How do we sanctify Shabbat? Thou shalt sanctify it with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy senses. Sanctify the Sabbath by choice meals and beautiful garments. Delight your soul with pleasure, and I will reward you. God will reward you for this very pleasure. I'll do my best. So if we're trying to grasp this sometimes elusive idea of Sabbath, of Shabbat, of Kodesh, the holy set aside, ask yourselves, turn maybe the same neighbor, maybe the other neighbor, but is there something you need to put aside to make Shabbat feel a little different? And think of one small observance that could make the holiness of Shabbat more accessible to you. Take a moment, think it over, inspire your neighbor. What's one observance? Maybe it's picking something up, maybe it's putting something down that could make Shabbat more accessible to you. One of the ideas that can make Shabbat feel a little bit different, that can make the holiness of Shabbat a little more accessible, I think Heschel beautifully encapsulates in the beginning of this seventh source. You have to have 7 sources. And this talks about the release of some worldly stressors and the embrace of divine peace. It is really hard to put it down. And this one really spoke to putting down some internal thoughts. All week, we may ponder and worry whether we are rich or poor, whether we succeed or fail in our occupations, whether we accomplish or fall short of reaching our goals. But who could feel distressed when gazing at spectral glimpses of eternity? He uses spectral glimpses of eternity, this mystical language. Shabbat doesn't erase our worries, but in this case it reframes them, and it reminds us that we are more than our productivity, and our worth is not measured in wealth or accomplishment. And we might go through Monday through Friday afternoon thinking about that bottom line or getting to the top of something, but he implores us to put that down on Shabbat and gaze upwards and be open to something that is not checking a box and marking a list. For the Sabbath day is a day of harmony and peace, he writes. Peace between man and man, peace within man, and peace with all things. On the seventh day, man has no right to tamper with God's world. We're reminded from Genesis that God rested. So we too must take a step back. We must acknowledge creation is not ours to endlessly manipulate. After all, it does not belong to us. So as we close this evening, and I hope you'll continue to read and study and talk to one another about this beautiful text, Heschel reminds us that the Sabbath is more than a pause. It in itself is an act of creation and a way to remind ourselves that time and not things are holy. So I hope that this Shabbat brings you that peace. Peace within, peace between one another, and peace with our world around us. And may we, week by week, continue to visit this palace in time together. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Yeshakach.